I am not going to discuss the nitty-gritties of WTO. That you will anyways cover in the economy section. The nitty-gritties of the basic technical aspects of WTO. Amber blocks, blue box, ye box, wo box. All those things you will cover in the economy section. But what I'm going to, when we talk about right now the WTO Ministerial or its some of the key outcomes primarily related to patents, then what I am going to do is firstly talk to you about just the very basic idea of what is WTO or why was it formed, because ये एक basic आपको पता होना चाहिए. What is WTO and basically why was it formed as an organization? Then how does WTO and its associated agreements look at the issue of patents, or what is also called as intellectual property rights? Okay. Then a fundamental idea जो आप शायद कहीं और इतना easily नहीं पढ़ेंगे, and that is about what is intellectual property rights. You will still read about, but what are the ethical dilemmas? The same topic can also be asked in multiple places. When I'm saying what are the ethical dilemmas around patent laws, then what are the, or what was in key discussion was about patent exemptions, their associated laws in India, patent exemptions, their associated laws in India, as well as patent exemptions or their associated laws in India, as well as what are some of their key provisions associated with it, and partly what should be done or what can be done to ensure the access to medicines or for all. In your prelims examination before, there was direct question which has been asked on section 5D of the Indian Patent Act. What does it pertain to? Question has been asked in your prelims examination about compulsory licensing. What is compulsory licensing? ये सारी चीजें will cover. Okay. Question have been asked in the mains examination also on the Novartis case and compulsory licensing. Now these are partly technical things, but I'm going to cover those things related to IPR laws, process patent, product patent, all those things also. So those of you have some idea, good. Those who don't have, we picked up the more difficult topic, but by the end of the lecture, hopefully you should be able to make sense of all these things. Now आप देखिए पिछले 5-6 साल में जाके बहुत क्वेश्चंस आए हैं इससे, एंड दे विल कंटिन्यू टू कम. ओके, यहीं पे आप जब बात करते हैं ट्रिप्स आईपीआर लॉज में, ट्रेड रिलेटेड इंटेलेक्चुअल प्रॉपर्टी राइट्स agreement, also called as the TRIPS agreement. So that's something which is there. Now if all of this is clear to you, let's quickly now go one by one and first have a brief idea. Now whatever are the relevant, many of the relevant points are given in the handout. Okay, not everything is there in the handout. आंख और कान और हाथ तीनों एक साथ चलाइए. So in terms of why did the idea of WTO, or why was the idea of WTO conceived? Why the idea of WTO was conceived, and why this idea was given is because those who gave this idea firstly understood that they would benefit from such a system. Let me explain. Very briefly, during the Cold War era, you may think, sir, kahan se isme Cold War aa gaya? Economics always goes along with politics. Okay. During the Cold War era, there is the US bloc and the Soviet Union bloc. Now, the Soviet Union bloc is more in favor of a socialist model of economic growth, and also India also partly followed such a socialist model of economic growth in the post-independence era. And also it was thus a model of which run economy? State run economy, where the state will own the major industries. The state will own the major industries, and as the state owns the major industries, the state will, thus private companies or their role will be large or small? Small. Or only a small role will be played by private companies. So most of the companies will be PSUs or government owned companies. In such a scenario, they said that we are going to associate with the socialist model a which approach? A inward looking approach. And in this inward looking approach, they said we don't want to do trade with USA, any major or any other major country, or we are not going to follow any free trade regime or the idea that we should have a large amount of trade with other countries. We will do only trade with other countries on goods that we can't produce. You can't produce oil, so you will buy oil. You don't have enough defense production, so you will buy defense weapons. So as per need, we will open trade with other countries on a case by case basis, and rather protect the Indian market for whom? Indian producers. And to protect the Indian market for Indian producers, what we will do is that we will erect what we call as tariff or custom barriers, so that if you erect tariff or custom barriers and say if US companies want to sell automobiles in India, they will have to pay 100% tax, import duty. That will make American cars expensive, and so nobody will buy, and so that will ensure that the Indian market is protected for Indian automobile producers. Okay, so basically we followed what was not what? Free trade. In fact, it was a very restricted trade regime, and not just India but a large number of other states in the world were following this idea of a restricted trade. But this idea of restricted trade was not acceptable to whom? USA and its key Western partners, which argued for free trade. USA and many of the major Western developed states, such as European states, USA, etc., Britain, France, all of them argued for what they call as free trade. And they said that we should have an open world without borders, where goods and people can move, goods and services can move easily. Okay, so let us think of a world where goods and services can move freely, and so came in the idea that we should promote free trade. For goods and services to move freely, all countries must reduce the tariffs or import or export tariffs, whether import or export tariffs, countries must reduce. Okay, and must adopt the idea of what is called as MFN, most favored nations. And उसमें भी ये दो शब्द मैं इसलिए बता रहा हूं क्योंकि ये प्रीलिम्स में भी काम आएंगे आपको. They use two words, national treatment and most favored nation. National treatment का मतलब क्या होता है कि foreign companies which are selling goods in India or buying goods in India from India or are setting up their manufacturing in India. Say tomorrow a Hyundai comes and sets up a manufacturing base in India. It's a Korean company. Or Toyota comes and sets up a manufacturing base in India. Or Tesla comes. They will be given national treatment. That the foreign company will be treated on par or equally with whom? With Indian companies. Meaning you will not give a preference to whom? Indian companies over foreign companies. You will not say that Bajaj will pay 20% income tax or 20% GST and Toyota will pay 30% or 40%. Or Bajaj will pay in India 20% income tax for the profits it made and Toyota will pay 30%. You will treat all companies which operate in India equally. National treatment. That's the idea of national treatment. Okay. That's one. Meaning allowing foreign companies to compete in India at par with Indian domestic companies. That's one. The other is most favored nation. Meaning India, say, will not give a preference to or will give an equal preference to a Bangladeshi company or a Japanese company. Irrespective of what is the origin of that company, which country it comes from, you will favor all of them equally. Meaning, whether it is Toyota or it is Hyundai, okay, or some Bangladeshi company if you can think of, then all of them will be given equal treatment. So one is about treating foreign companies at par with Indian companies. The other is treating all foreign companies equally. Most favored nation means you will not favor one nation over the other. The name is Ulta. इसको याद रखने की एक simple सी कहानी है. I always love telling that कहानी because it tells how enlightened people are. It sounds confusing, right? You're saying most favored nation means that you will give equal preference to all countries. What does that mean? You will give no preference to any country. Ultimately, बात तो यही हुई ना. If you are saying all countries will be treated equally, meaning you are not giving any special preference to any country. And this sounds confusing. Most favored है कि नहीं है. The idea is non-discrimination. And so, it is a deceptive name. ना सीधे सीधे MCQ prelims में भी आया पहले अब तक. What does MFN refer to? Okay. So, it refers to the idea of non-discrimination, giving equal preference to all countries while accessing where? Indian market. Accessing either Indian imports or exports. Please understand, it's not just about imports. What if China tomorrow says we ban all trade with India? It goes against the idea of MFN. है ना? So MFN के limitations भी हैं, कुछ exemptions भी हैं MFN में. So India, for example, when this MFN idea was conceptualized and when WTO was formed, it was formed on these twin pillars of national treatment and MFN. They said if you don't give MFN status, if you don't give national treatment, then there can never be free trade. And also said that all countries must reduce their import and export tariffs. ये सब चीजें जब आप करेंगे, then you will make a world where a Bangladeshi textile good can be sold in India also, can be sold in US also. A US software can be sold in India also, can be sold in Sri Lanka also. Okay, you will connect the world. For connecting the world economically, you need to reduce tariff, give them national treatment, give them most favored nation status. And this is the idea of free trade. Who is supporting the idea of free trade? USA and West. Why? Because at this time, most of the manufacturing industries of the world are located in the West. देखिए अभी थोड़ा सा समझने में, इसलिए मैंने बोला था थोड़ा सा your brain cells will be forced to think. We say broadly goods are of 2 or 3 kinds. One are agricultural goods, the other are manufactured goods, and then there are what we call as services, which is your IT exports today or banking, finance, जो भी चीजें हैं, एजुकेशन, एंटरटेनमेंट, है ना. नेटफ्लिक्स क्या है? सर्विस. दिस वाज आल्सो इन डिस्कशन इन द जीएसटी in the WTO ministerial this time. Okay, so all of that is video games, कुछ भी, all of that is services. Now, in the WTO, early 92, when the WTO comes into agreement, into formalization, the underlying agreement for the WTO is what, हो सकता है आपने नाम सुना हो तो बहुत अच्छी बात है, नहीं सुना तो बाद में आप पढ़ेंगे इकोनॉमी में. Please don't understand that I am teaching you economy. I am not teaching you economy. I am teaching you a policy. Okay. Economy में आप पढ़ेंगे there is a general agreement on tariffs and trade called as GATT agreement, है ना. तो जब आप पढ़ेंगे GATT agreement, you will say that an agreement was signed from GATT and then Uruguay round and this round and that round, वो पूरे round होके एक basic agreement, the general agreement on tariffs and trade became the basis for the formalization of WTO. ये कब हुआ? 1992-93, right? क्यों हुआ है 92-93 में? All countries, 192 countries in the world came together and said we all stand for free trade. ऐसा इसके बाद इतिहास में एक ही बार हुआ है, Paris Climate Change Deal. So why did 192 countries came together in 1992-93? Because that is when the Soviet Union had collapsed. When Soviet Union had collapsed, there was no other competing vision, economic vision for the world left. USA and European countries had the most of the manufacturing and services units in the world. When they said free trade, they wanted India and developing countries to open their market so that Western companies could sell goods in India or other developing countries. Free trade would benefit whom? The assumption of Western countries was that free trade will benefit Western companies, capture new market which was still now not open to them. So free trade meant more American companies getting market in the non-Western world. And thus, this was a topic of intense discussion in the WTO. Ki, yes, we stand for free trade, but Who said? The Americans said we stand for free trade. The developing countries said we stand also for free trade, but we also stand for free and equitable trade. ठीक है. So I'm not going into the details right now because we're not going to go into too much details. But the idea was free trade would benefit the Western countries, and that is why they supported the formation of WTO as a organization which was based on the principle of free trade. And developing countries were apprehensive or concerned कि ये free trade may do what? What can free trade do? That American companies can capture the Indian market and Indian producers will lose the Indian market. So their concern was that free trade may lead to destroying Indian industries. Their concern was this. So while they supported the idea of free trade, they were very cautious. And India said, we are for free trade, but we want safeguards. तो ये फिर बस ये होता रहा उसके बाद से जब चालू हुआ है कि जो WTO में डिस्कशन है, it has primarily been led by whom? Developed countries like USA and European countries. They put an agenda mostly on the table, and India and developing countries ask for safeguards. तो यही कहानी चली है. इसी को कहते हैं नॉर्थ साउथ डिवाइड, डेवलप्ड वर्सेस डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज. आपने पढ़ा होगा इंडिया एंड साउथ अफ्रीका मूव अ जॉइंट रेजोल्यूशन in the WTO Ministerial. Why South Africa? Because it's also a developing countries, and developing countries are often concerned that if developed countries have their way and they decide the rules of free trade, then they will capture the developing countries market. Do developing countries want free trade? Yes. Countries like India also have developed a strong service sector. We also want to export our softwares, our doctors, our engineers, etc. to the world. Service में you can send people also or softwares also. Like Indian companies going to US. So we also want free trade. They also want free trade. But the definition of free trade is not the same. ठीक है, तो हमेशा ये होता है वो अपने इश्यूज उठाते हैं, we pick up our issues. Why am I telling you this broad story? Because this is important to understand the patent laws. When WTO was formed, the first agenda, major agenda on the discussion of WTO was intellectual property rights. The West came up with the idea of IPR laws that all WTO countries must abide by. India said we need safeguards. तो ये ब्रॉड कॉन्टेक्स्ट जब आप समझेंगे तभी उसका, वरना आप 90% पीपल रीड अबाउट WTO एज इफ वन फाइन डे 190 कंट्रीज केम टुगेदर, ऑल ऑफ अ सडन डिसाइडेड कि नहीं वी नीड फ्री ट्रेड, एंड दे कंसेप्चुअलाइज द आइडिया ऑफ WTO. Rules in international relations are often drafted by the powerful players, and without their support, international organizations or institutions cannot survive. A United Nations cannot survive without the United States. The USA can survive without United Nations. ठीक है, तो international organizations derive their strength from powerful actors. Powerful बार बार लोग बच्चे जब शुरू में तैयार करते सर यूएन ने ये कह दिया, अरे कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता यूएन ने क्या कह दिया. It is USA what says carries more weight than what UN. Does UN have a standing army? No. Does USA have a standing army? Yes. Has UN even passed a single resolution on Ukraine? Nothing has happened. Even if they pass a resolution, nothing will happen. Who has the fund, the army, the resources? USA, Russia, China. So these states thus have a major say, even in UN or outside UN. Okay, so that is what has to be understood. MFN, और इसकी एक सिंपल सी छोटी सी कहानी है ताकि सब हमेशा याद रखें, that MFN means non-discriminatory market access. एक और टर्म यूज होता है उसके लिए, NDMA, non-discriminatory market access is another term used for what? M, meaning you will not discriminate between any countries. And it was expected that as you sign the general agreement on tariffs and trade, all countries will give MFN status to each other. So it was expected India will also give MFN status to Pakistan, and Pakistan will also give MFN status to India. Okay, all countries must give that kind of a status, which means if you give MFN, meaning our Pakistani goods will be sold in India and Indian goods will be sold in Pakistan. Okay, you won't discriminate against Indian goods entry into Pakistan and vice versa. However, the WTO and GATT agreement says, unless exceptional circumstances warrant, MFN must be given to all countries. And obviously, exceptional circumstances, what? India and Pakistan. So that is there, meaning in case of any conflict, war, etc., countries can deny each other MFN status, but only under exceptional circumstances. So India did not also give MFN, Pakistan also did not give MFN to India. Silently, India in 2002-03 around, India gave MFN status to Pakistan. Pakistan did not. Okay, when Parvez Musharraf and Vajpayee were having their talks, that is where it was decided to give MFN status. Pakistan then tried, he will give MFN status to India. So opposition political parties in Pakistan said, "Arey, you are saying enemy number one is your most favored nation." Government clarified, no, it is non-discriminatory market access. Opposition said, you are trying to fool us. You want to favor India. You are whom? Indian agent. The popular refrain in Pakistani politics is, whichever government is in power, the opposition party says it is an Indian agent. And this is the brand of politics of South Asia, not just Pakistan. Okay. So, till now, Pakistan has not granted India a MFN or an NDMA status. उन्होंने कोशिश करी, उसके बाद फिर से पार्लियामेंट में इंट्रोड्यूस अ रेजोल्यूशन टू ग्रांट इंडिया नॉन डिस्क्रिमिनेटरी मार्केट एक्सेस. It hasn't gone through. Okay, that is there. So that's about, so though they mean the same thing, but शब्दों में क्या है, बहुत कुछ है, right? Most favored nation seems as if you are favoring one country over the others, whereas in reality it only means equal treatment. I hope that's clear. Now let's get into patent rights. Okay, and WTO. So, and thus, as I was saying, that the whole idea of free trade was supported by the Western developed countries with a strong manufacturing base, that it would help them enter, that free trade would help them enter where? New markets. By the way, ये मैंने इसलिए बताया है, बट चलिए थोड़ा सा और बताता हूं. ये इसलिए है क्योंकि अभी आपने न्यूज़पेपर में पढ़ा होगा, एक आर्टिकल आया होगा अबाउट इंडिया पैसिफिक इकोनॉमिक फोरम, IPEF ना. तो जब ये फ्री ट्रेड की बात हुई तो वेस्टर्न कंपनीज हैड स्ट्रॉन्ग मैन्युफैक्चरिंग बेस एंड दे होप टू कैप्चर मार्केट, बट the free, and by the way, this is the time associated with this idea of WTO backed free trade. You see a number of US companies started shifting base to manufacturing in China, and China emerged as a manufacturing base for US companies. So Nike, say, was a company which was based in USA, shifted its shoe manufacturing to China, did the R&D here, research and development here, manufactured the shoe in China and sold it in India. This is what is free trade, right? It doesn't matter from which country you are, where is your manufacturing base, you can sell all over the world, right? You're connecting the world in a way, okay? And eventually a number of US companies shifted their manufacturing base to China, and China emerged as a major manufacturing hub. Between 1980s to 2010, for 30 years, China emerged as the world's manufacturing hub. And as it emerged as the world's manufacturing hub, it became also the world's second largest economy. And also the US-China trade boomed. They became each other's biggest trading partners. In this process, and this I'm partly digressing from WTO to explain you India Pacific Economic Forum में एक शब्द आया होगा जो आपने पढ़ा होगा लेकिन इसका मतलब आप नहीं समझे होंगे. That in this process, a number of American companies which were establishing their manufacturing base in China, they brought with themselves what is called as intellectual property, making smartphones or their technology of making smartphones, say for an example, or computers, or a number of other high-end technology goods like 5G technology. Okay, eventually you see. So a number of technology which was developed in the West was being manufactured in China, and it is here that the Chinese partly or practically stole their intellectual property to a certain extent, and a number of Chinese companies also came up. Okay, तो आपने देखा होगा कि आईफोन का एक फीचर है वो OnePlus में भी होगा या कहीं से और फोन में भी होगा. A lot of duplication of technology eventually happened where the Chinese, firstly, economy continued to grow because of US companies also, and new Chinese companies also came up. And when by the time the Trump administration came, USA said this free trade is no longer suitable. What we need is fair trade. देखिए ये शब्द, अभी इस शब्द में एक और चेंज आएगा. अभी तो from 1990s to 2010 they kept talking about free trade. After that, with concerns around IPR violations, the talk shifted towards fair trade, meaning there must be strong what? IPR laws. अरे देखिए स्ट्रॉन्ग आईपीआर लॉज, इसके लिए ये आईपीआर से भी लिंक्ड है क्योंकि ये सब कुछ आईपीआर है. क्या आईपीआर है? इंटेलेक्चुअल प्रॉपर्टी. व्हाट इज इंटेलेक्चुअल प्रॉपर्टी? देखिए पहली बात, कन्वेंशनल आइडिया ऑफ प्रॉपर्टी इज व्हाट? लैंड. एनीथिंग दैट यू कैन टच इज प्रॉपर्टी, है ना? लैंड. जैसे दिल्ली में है तो दिल्ली में एक ही है, प्लाट ही प्लाट, लैंड ही लैंड, वही है प्रॉपर्टी. एग्रीकल्चरल लैंड, दिस लैंड, दैट लैंड, गोल्ड इज अ प्रॉपर्टी, व्हाटएवर. But intellectual property is something which is intangible. A song is an intellectual property. A book is an intellect. जो टेलीग्राम पे मिलती है फ्री में, इंटेलेक्चुअल प्रॉपर्टी। लेवाइस का जो 200 रुपए वाला जीन्स मिलता है करोल बाग में, इंटेलेक्चुअल प्रॉपर्टी। So all of this is intellectual property, which often is not considered very tangible but has serious economic value. Intellectual property also is in high-end technology. How to make a medicine, the exact formula is an intellectual property. Okay. So it is in this context that they said they are stealing our intellectual property. This is not fair trade. We need strong IPR laws and mechanisms to prevent and protect intellectual property. Then came what? Kya? 2020? What came? COVID. Now what happened? China shut down. So the manufacturing supply bases of the companies were gone or disrupted in a major way. From chip shortages to this shortage to that shortage to the manufacturing automobile sector, everything was disrupted. Because there was, they said, an over reliance on China. And if something untoward happened in China, it would disrupt global economy and global trade, because China was the manufacturing base of the world. So they said, we should not put all our eggs in one basket. If all manufacturing happens in the world in China and China is hit by a tsunami tomorrow, no, that's possible, right? Japan was hit by a tsunami. Public memory is very short. 2012, Japan was hit by a tsunami. Okay. The same can hit China. Most of Chinese industries are located on the eastern coast of China. So it's not a, there's a 10-degree Richter 10 earthquake in China. So why in a world where climate change, etc., or now you have COVID, so COVID, climate change, blah, blah, blah. If because of uncertainties associated with the world, if China is struck by any calamity, it will disrupt economic trade, and the clear example is COVID. So we should diversify away from China. The world needs not just free trade, it needs fair trade, but it also now needs resilient trade. A trade which is resilient to expected or unexpected calamities. So the the Indo-Pacific Economic Forum says that now is the need to move towards fair and resilient trade. Fair trade means what? Keep a check on intellectual property. It also means keep a check on China. Resilient trade means what? Diversify your manufacturing base away from China. It also means reduce your dependence on China. You can't go to war with China if half your company's manufacturing bases are in. वो शब्द वही है, वो शब्द आप कहां तक समझे ये इस पे डिपेंडेंट है कि आप you know the history, the politics or not, and you are able to see politics and economics going together or not. So ये question आएगा, हो सकता है इस साल ही मेंस में आ जाए, that the global trade regime needs to shift from free trade to fair and resilient trade. Comment. And then बच्चे will be like, सर ये तो किसी ने पढ़ाया ही नहीं, ये तो बुक में है ही नहीं, ये तो नोट्स में है ही नहीं. आपको कुछ खुद भी दिमाग लगाना है. And that is why the idea is that whenever you're reading current affairs, a certain basic knowledge of subjects, history, politics, economics is always useful. ठीक है. तो अभी आई एम नॉट टॉकिंग अबाउट फेयर एंड रेजिलिएंट ट्रेड. इंडिया पैसिफिक इकोनॉमिक फोरम पे हम बाद में बात करेंगे कभी, बट बिकॉज इट वाज हियर सो आई काइंड ऑफ लिंक्ड इट है. सो I hope this much is clear. Any doubts still here? Anything you want to ask? Ji. What are the favorable conditions that made China the largest manufacturing base of the world? Are many, not one. One is China has a huge population, which is a potential working force. Secondly, China from 1970s and 1980s did universal primary and secondary education. From the Mao Zedong era ended, 1969 के बाद China brought universal education for all. So because having people is not enough, they need to be educated and skilled. Otherwise, your so-called demographic dividend will become a demographic nightmare. So they educated, they focused on education and health and skilling of their workers. Secondly, the government came up with policies to attract manufacturing companies from all over the world. By coming up with the idea, it was they who came up with the idea of, the Chinese came up with the idea of the special economic zones. They said in these special economic zone, any company can come from the world, set up their manufacturing base. Within 5 days, we will give land clearance. Within 10 days, we will give electricity. Within 15 days, we will give water supply. You set up your manufacturing base. You don't have to acquire land. Government will give land on lease. Ease of doing business, labor, skilled manpower, sorted. And China emerged as a manufacturing base of the world as well. So that's broadly said to be certain factors behind the Chinese success story. Okay. And that is why when students ask, कि sir China communist है कि नहीं? People don't understand that China is not a communist state. It is an example of state-led capitalism. ये अलग ही दुनिया है. इसके लिए वेस्टर्न टर्मिनोलॉजी एंड अंडरस्टैंडिंग में जगह ही नहीं है. Because it is neither a democracy, it is neither a state, it is a state-led economy, but not, it is a state-led economy because the government decides the policies and it's a very complex structure. It's beyond आपके syllabus के लिए जरूरत भी नहीं है. But it is definitely not a democratic capitalist state. So you can't just go ahead and open a company there and expect that the government will allow you to function. Some of the biggest Chinese companies like Alibaba, Tencent Global, एक झटके में they've said कि बेटा तुमको तो हम देख लेंगे. Most Indians know nothing about China, primarily because obviously our media doesn't cover it, we don't have no knowledge, nor is it required at your exam level. ठीक है, तो अपन ज्यादा ना जाएं, but इतना is the basic of the Chinese success story. चलिए, anything else? By the way, your question has a certain relevance, that's why I answered. Because it is often argued, what should India do to become a manufacturing powerhouse? We say, have ease of doing business, have a trained and skilled workforce, give faster clearances. That is how you make in India. So that is why China is considered an example worth replicating as far as manufacturing success stories are concerned. Right? So that's it. Chaliye. Now let's go to patent rights. Okay. Now let's go to patent rights. In terms of, yes, Ji. So question, मतलब what is it that you are trying to ask? That China erects certain tariff and non-tariff barriers to Indian goods. Like India keeps arguing that China doesn't erect custom barriers maybe, और इम्पोर्ट ड्यूटीज, बट उनका क्लियरेंस ग्रांटिंग प्रोसेस or import or export of goods is so complex that they make it difficult for Indian companies to sell goods in Chinese market. एक ये technicality है. So this is where in WTO there is a mechanism that's called the DSB, the Dispute Settlement Body. So what happens is India and China, have they given MFN status to each other? China joined the WTO. And when China joined the WTO, it gave MFN status to each other, to India also. Now, India may accuse China or may raise a question that no, China, despite giving MFN status to India, is not abiding by the idea of MFN. In such cases, India can take the matter to the dispute settlement body of the WTO, or if any country is found, and or India can also retaliate against China, that if you don't give us MFN, we will also not give you MFN. Okay. We don't allow the cultural languages of other. क्या कौन सी ऐसी बांग्लादेश की लैंग्वेज? ट्रेड की बात हो रही है यहाँ तो. क्या सर्विसेज में आएगा? सर्विस इज समथिंग दैट यू आर अलाउड टू बाय एंड सेल इन द मार्केट ना. तो बांग्लादेश क्या बंगाली आके सिखा नहीं सकते हैं क्या इंडिया में लैंग्वेज? सिखा सकते हैं. चाइनीज नहीं सिखा सकते हैं या चाइनीज एम्बेसी सिखाती है? ऐसा तो कुछ नहीं. ओके, बट हाँ, वो जो टैरिफ नॉन टैरिफ बैरियर वाली एक बात है वो है और उस पर बार बार बात उठती है, बट दैट कैन बी सेटल्ड थ्रू डिस्प्यूट सेटलमेंट बॉडीज. बट देयर इज नथिंग अबाउट कल्चरल एक्टिविटीज बीइंग लिमिटेड. ऐसा नहीं है कुछ. ठीक है, इट्स ओके टू हैव सर्टेन डाउट्स. जो जब डाउट होगा तभी तो कुछ पता चलेगा. चलिए नेक्स्ट, लेट्स गो फॉरवर्ड, टॉक अबाउट पेटेंट राइट्स एंड लॉज. इसमें तो आई हैव गिवन यू अ सब्सटैंटिव आइडिया अबाउट व्हाट इज WTO एंड व्हाई वाज इट फॉर्म्ड. नाउ WTO agreements, patents, IPR and TRIPS. The West has always, now if you can understand, has always played a very strong emphasis on intellectual property. Okay. And the West argued under WTO that while we do free trade, we should protect all intellectual property. Like what? For example, trademarks, copyright, patents, इंडस्ट्रियल पेटेंट्स या जो भी तरह के पेटेंट्स होते हैं, एटसेट्रा एटसेट्रा. ओके, so they said we should protect this because, okay, for example, as you said, books, medicines, कुछ भी है ना? So all of that is intellectual property. Music, all of that is intellectual property. Protect the intellectual property. Why? Why should intellectual property must be protected? What is the ethical angle of this? You are the inventor of a new song, or you are the owner of a brand. Why? Or you have come up with a new medicine. You have invented a new medicine or a new song or your established brand. Then why should it be protected? Why should intellectual property be protected? This is the ethical angle. Why should intellectual property be protected? बताइए. Because it has cost and investment. Okay. हाँ, तो नुकसान हुआ आपका. Basically, there are two things. Firstly, a very simple point is this, that the inventor individual, organization, whoever has spent time, resources, etc. So it will end up not rewarding whom? Not rewarding the inventor, despite them being putting in what? Their hard work, resources, time, effort, all of that. It does not reward the inventor despite their efforts. What this does is, so it does harms whom? The individual who is the inventor, whether that's an organization or an individual. But does it harm the larger society? Huh? No. Or yes? How many think yes? How many think no? It harms the society, it can be argued, because if there is no protection for the intellectual property, then people will stop taking initiative to come up with new inventions or put in the time and effort to make new inventions. Because if everybody can copy, then why to invent? Wait, koi to karega, फिर we will copy. It harms because it will harm inventions, and by not, and if nobody is going to take the initiative for making new inventions to deal with the existing problems, then it will harm the larger society. Just come to think of COVID. If everybody was to just sit back, or every company was to sit back and say, अरे वैक्सीन हम क्यों बनाएं? Why should we spend time and resources? एक बार कोई बना ले फिर कॉपी कर लेंगे. Then not rewarding the inventor also not just harms the individual, but may also have a negative consequences, because it disincentivizes innovation in the society. Okay, so while it may harm the individual inventor, not having protecting intellectual property, it may also harm the wider society, as it would slow the pace of innovation to deal with new or existing challenges. Yes. So what have I told you? Why is it considered important to have intellectual property rights or laws to protect intellectual property? Because you can reward the individual and his effort also, his or her effort also, and it will benefit the society. Because when you are giving the, when you are rewarding an individual, you are sending a message to the wider society also, that those who put in the right efforts will also make gains out of it, whether economic gains or other gains also. So that is why strong intellectual property right laws benefit individual and the wider society. ठीक है, लेकिन उल्टा भी है. यही तो है एथिकल डिलेमा. रेमडेसिविर चल रहा था एक साल पहले तक, 1 lakh rupees, 2 lakh rupees, 5 lakh rupees, whatever. You may say it is because of less production, black marketing, इसलिए हो रहा होगा, छोड़ दीजिए. There are so many anti-cancer medicines right now produced today, which cost around 5 or 10 lakh rupees a month to take, and you may have to take those medicines for a year or 2 years also, and you may spend crores per individual treatment. ऐसी medicines हैं which are anti-cancer medicines, etc., etc. Like the Novartis case went to the court eventually. So basically there are medicines which are protected under IPR laws, which protect the right of patents, but the patent holder, the patent जिसने medicine को patent किया है, he or that organization has the exclusive right to produce that medicine or vaccine or test for etc etc. Patent से medicine में नहीं होता, और भी चीजों में होता है, but I am giving the medicine example because that is what has been in discussion. For a period of 20 years. Under the patent laws, it is said that the original innovator will have the exclusive rights to produce and distribute the new technology for a period of 20 years. Because when they have this exclusive right, what can they do? They will make financial gains. And 20 years is a good time for them to recover their cost and make good profits. After which, after these 20 years, the medicine will be free from patent. Meaning, any other producers can also make the same medicine or the vaccine or the test after 20 years. So, the exclusive rights will be for 20 years. It will reward the patent holder, and after 20 years, कॉपीराइट्स में ये अलग है. कॉपीराइट में ड्यूरेशन ज्यादा है, 50 years, जब तक जिंदा है, ये वो whatever. Okay, तो reward the patent holders, and after this, once the duration is of 20 years is over, then it is free to be produced by other manufacturers. Normally, when a medicine is patented, the cost is relatively higher, because basically there's only one producer, so you can dictate the price. Once everybody starts producing, or other companies also start producing, there will be competition. A patent holder has a monopoly to produce. Once that monopoly is gone, then others can also produce, the cost will come down. But what if in these 20 years, what about these 20 years? What if the cost of the medicine is kept so high for the initial 20 years that most people can't buy? What happens then? Has this happened before? In many cases it has happened. One of the classic examples, and that will explain why South Africa is saying so, is the AIDS epidemic. In 1980 and 90s, South Africa had AIDS almost as a public health problem, meaning a large number of people suffered from AIDS in South Africa. So much so even that the life expectancy in South Africa had started to fall. Normally countries का life expectancy slowly and steadily बढ़ा है after 1945, but in 1980s to 90s, the life expectancy in South Africa started to fall because of this large prevalence of AIDS, which was anyways considered almost like a death sentence at that time, right? I mean, if you had AIDS, you're like, now you're gonna die, right? And it is at this time that Pfizer and other US pharma companies had, some of the other US pharma companies had come up with effective anti-HIV or anti-AIDS medicines, which were called as ARTs, antiretroviral medicines, which could kill the HIV virus. अपने को इतना बता आप anti-HIV छोड़. They developed whom? Anti-HIV medicines, and South Africa was dealing with the AIDS pandemic. Pfizer said this medicine apparently was to be taken, as of now there was no clarity on how long it would have been taken. It was assumed it will have to be taken lifelong. The cost at which Pfizer was ready to sell this medicine to the South African government was $1,000 per pill per day. एक आदमी को रोज $1000 की मेडिसिन खानी है और जीवन भर. This definitely meant it would be outside the reach of practically everyone. And it is at this time that CIPLA said, South Africa said, we do not recognize. This is where pre-WTO. अभी WTO नहीं बना है ना, हटाओ ये सब. Forget Pfizer. Anybody who makes this medicine can sell it in South Africa. We will not stop them. We will deal with the Americans. So be it. जो होगा वो sanction लगाएंगे, हम देख लेंगे जो है. Okay. And it is at this time that CIPLA started making this at 1,000 times lower price and solved the healthcare crisis of South Africa single-handedly. And basically started making the same medicines at $1 per pill per day, exposing or bringing forward the other ethical side of what? Patents. That if the patent holder exercises their patent rights in a manner that even in a health emergency keeps the cost of medicine so high that it is outside the reach of people, then why did you bring patent laws in the beginning? Why did you bring patent laws in the beginning? मैं लिखूंगा, आप लिख लीजिए मेरे साथ. Why did you bring patent laws? They question, देखिए, why did you bring patent laws? To reward the inventor and to benefit whom? Society. Now the patent holder exercises his right in a manner which doesn't benefit society. Not giving the patent holder right also harms society, but giving the patent holder the absolute right with no safeguards of even a health emergency or a pandemic also doesn't benefit society. So you need intellectual property rights, but with safeguards. अब आ गया सेफगार्ड. यही सेफगार्ड के लिए किसने आवाज उठाएगी? इंडिया. और तो आपको ये लग रहा है कि पहली बार ऐसा क्यों वो साउथ अफ्रीका और क्यों ये इंडिया और ये क्यों एक साथ हो जाते हैं ऐसे, है ना? तो दिस इज द हिस्ट्री and this is also what explains the negotiating position of developing countries. Developing countries say we are not against the idea of patents, we are not against the idea of intellectual property rights, but we also want safeguards so that while the rights of patent holders are upheld, it is not done at the cost of the larger public welfare. है ना? So this is the ethical dilemma also. Should you have patent rights then? Yes. But should you also have safeguards? Yes. Is this point clear? I have given this in the handout also. ये वाला जो aspect है. So basically, patent rights thus must come with safeguards to ensure that patents are, or to ensure that inventions or discoveries made benefit whom? The larger society. And these safeguards can be exemptions to waive patents in extraordinary what situations. ठीक है. Now by 95, अब देखिए इंडियन पेटेंट लॉज हैं क्या. By the way, now before that, even we go to Indian patent laws, what are the safeguards? India's law, this is a pre-WTO era. बोल रहा हूं ना, ये सब कहानी pre-WTO की है. So when WTO happened, then she's asking, did India or did CIPLA violate the patent laws? Firstly, this is a pre-WTO era and it did not violate Indian patent laws because Indian patent laws are different, as I'll explain later. But firstly, going into WTO, in 1995 were drafted what? The Trade Related Intellectual Property Rights Agreement. Trade Related Intellectual Property Rights नहीं लिखा जाता तो R गायब है यहां से, but Intellectual Property Rights Agreements. And TRIPS agreement was signed. Under this, India strongly argued for, India and South Africa and other developing countries also strongly argued for safeguards. And they said that if there is what? If there is an exceptional condition, such as many, they said, and gave examples, that if you, for example, if they said, and I've mentioned these conditions in the handout, आप बस समझ लीजिए broadly. They just said that there are 2 or 3 conditions, that the patent holder refuses to make the medicine or sell in your market. If Pfizer से बेचेंगे ही नहीं हम इंडिया में, हमको तुम्हारा शक्ल ही नहीं पसंद है, हम बेचेंगे ही नहीं इंडिया में, then India will give a time of a 3-year or 5-year duration. If the patent holder doesn't sell the medicine in India, we will give permission for anybody to make that medicine. Okay, so it's not that patent holder can hold you ransom. देखिए, people don't understand this value. Only the pandemic may make you realize this. Suppose you invented the vaccine. Indian market said, government said, if you have to sell vaccine in India, sell it in 1500 rupees. They say बेचेंगे ही नहीं साला तुमको, तुम्हारी औकात ही नहीं है खरीदने. Did they say this to African countries? Yes. They said आप तुम्हारा औकात तो पैसा ही नहीं दे पाओगे हमको, क्या करो, नेवल बेस दे दो. They did. Pfizer, American government said Pfizer needs guarantee. Who will give Pfizer guarantee? You African country, you can't give. US government will give guarantee to Pfizer. But for US government to give guarantee to Pfizer, you give us guarantee. What can you give? Naval base. Give us naval base, we will give you vaccine. This is how the real world works. Okay. So it is in this context that if you deny access or hold back access, then we can violate your patent right. Okay. Most people think wars are fought involving guns and all this. This is the real war, the war to hold intellectual property. Okay. Now, if the patent holder refuses to sell, or the cost of the medicine is so high that it is outside the reach of the masses, or if there is a public health emergency, the government can grant a compulsory license. The government can grant a compulsory license. To whom? Other companies. So it can grant a license to a Cipla, to anybody, that you make this medicine, you do this, make this test, you make this vaccine, so that it is available to all. And thus compulsory license is a safeguard built into the TRIPS agreement. Who argued for this safeguard? India and South Africa. Okay, India, South Africa, China also supported at this time. It was not just India and South Africa, India, South Africa, China. A lot of them stood up arguing for compulsory license regime to safeguard public what? Public health. देखिए, आप लोगों ने शायद कभी ये मूवी देखी ना हो, नहीं देखी है तो देख लीजिएगा. Dallas Buyers Club. It's a classic movie on the AIDS epidemic of the 1980s, where from South America, from Mexico, जो US border है, Mexico से लगता है. So there, this person, there a group of doctors and researchers, they found out the formula and started making the medicine. And there's one person who was suffering from AIDS. He used to take his car into Mexico, fill the medicine. He was himself suffering from AIDS. He used to take his car to Mexico, fill the medicine, smuggle it into US, sell it in US, make profit also, and still sell it a much cheaper price than Pfizer. The government came after him. Everybody came after him and he kept selling. Dallas Buyers Club. So he made a buyers club where AIDS people would come to him rather than go to any doctor because they can't buy the medicine. Australian people come to India for certain medicines which are much cheaper in India than in Australia, like for hepatitis C, etc., etc. अरे वो एक वायल 10-10 लाख रुपए की है, 2 वायल इधर से उधर, right? So these are these expensive, extremely expensive medicines and treatments which are there. And so this is something which has happened from time to time. So what are compulsory licenses and when are they granted? We argued for those safeguards and it became a part of WTO itself. ट्रिप्स अग्रीमेंट के अंदर ही हमने घुसा दिया कि जब तक ट्रिप्स रहेगा, जब तक कंपल्सरी लाइसेंस रहेगा. इफ देयर इज पेटेंट देन देयर इज कंपल्सरी लाइसेंस. बट and then did India use it? We have used it only once. South Africa has also used it, and African countries have used compulsory licenses, safeguards, and India used in the case, the famous case of Novartis, और इसी पे क्वेश्चन भी आया था, etc. That the Novartis case, and to understand partly the Novartis case, this is one safeguard. Which safeguard? Compulsory licensing. The second safeguard that India introduced was under section 5D of the Indian Patent Act. Indian Patent Act 2005. ये मैं आपको इंडियन पेटेंट लॉज भी पढ़ा दे रहा हूं क्योंकि सीधे सीधे आते हैं एग्जाम में. ठीक है, इंडियन पेटेंट एक्ट सेक्शन 5D ही सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट सेक्शन है. देखिए, पेटेंट कितने टाइम के लिए मिलता है? 20 years. नाउ दे आर वेरी होशियार, द वेस्टर्न कंपनी. The Western companies are like, listen, what we'll do is just about our patent, just about when the patent duration is about to expire, we will modify the original formula and extend the patent. Patent is for a new medicine. So, देखिए, यही Novartis केस में यही था. There was a medicine for anti-cancer medicine that Novartis made by the name of imatinib, and its patent was about to expire. just about when its patent was about to expire, it said we will no longer produce imatinib. बंद कर दिया, हम imatinib बनाएंगे ही नहीं. Rather, we are registering for a new patent, which is a modified version of imatinib called as imatinib mesitylate. They changed, partially tweaked the formula, and they said, this is a new invention we have done, sir. It has better efficacy in treating the disease. It has less side effects. ठीक है, तो ये नया है. अब वापस 20 साल के लिए हम ही बनाएंगे दुनिया में imatinib mesitylate. This is called evergreening of patent. So 20 years, देखिए, greed has no limit. अभी 20 साल से आपका सही चल रहा था, प्रॉफिट आप 20 और हो जाए. So you are saying we will modify the existing formula, evergreen patents, meaning हर 20 साल बाद you modify the existing formula थोड़ा सा and keep trying to monopolize the production of that medicine. The matter went to the Delhi High Court and those the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, using Section 5D of the Indian Patent Act, that this is not a new invention, because Section 5D of the Indian Patent Act says any new variant of the existing formula of an existing patented formula will or can be recognized as a new invention only when it is substantially or significantly high efficacy than existing formula or patented formula. Or you have found a new application for the same medicine. Otherwise, it is just an attempt to evergreen. Otherwise, it is merely an attempt to evergreen patents, which is disallowed under where? Under Indian patent laws. Indian patent laws do not allow the original patent holder to merely tweak the formula a bit and claim extension of the patent. समझ गए आप बात? ये थोड़ा जोर लग रहा है, देखिए थोड़ा जोर तो लगेगा ना. मैंने पहले ही बता दिया था कि इजी पढ़ना है कि डिफिकल्ट. आप ये समझ पा रहे हैं कि नहीं कि एवरग्रीनिंग इज समथिंग विच विल अलाउ द एग्जिस्टिंग कंपनी टू नॉट अलाउ एनी अदर कंपनी टू प्रोड्यूस द मेडिसिन इवन आफ्टर 20 years. 20 years के बाद ही है ये सारी कहानी, because the Novartis patent was about to expire and then they came up with this idea. They are saying that while we are modifying this formula, this is a new patent and this is something which will allow the extension of our existing patent. तो ये जो चीज है इसको Indian patent laws do not allow. When India came up with its own patent laws, India modified its patent laws in line with the TRIPS agreement. India said, we will not allow evergreening of patent. We comply with TRIPS. We comply with patent laws. But in the name of patent laws, we will not allow this evergreening of patents. And India said, no artists, we are issuing a compulsory license in the name of imatinib mesitylate. हो गया बवाल. US said, देख लेंगे तुमको हम. US, अरे आप देखिए, आप सोचिए, the US government says that this is a violation of IPR laws. The private company is saying it's okay, but US government says. This tells you how important these companies are to these government, that the government is willing to speak on behalf of a private company. So they are very powerful companies that ways. So matter went to the court, this, that, etc. खूब लड़ाई झगड़ा हुआ, but India issued a compulsory license also, did not recognize their extension of patent also. Okay, and thus this has become a legendary case. This is 2012-13, I think. The Novartis case ही से जाना जाता है इसको. Okay, so this was a success story of India's patent laws, and ensured that public health is also not compromised, and companies are not allowed to evergreen patents as a safeguard under Section 5D of the Indian Patent Act. 3D and 5D both work together. ठीक है, तो Section 5D of the Indian Patent Act is there, and 3D and 5D both. 3D 5D ऐसा लग रहा है मूवी की बात हो रही है, but that is there. Now, yeah, it's ये एक वही मैंने इसलिए बोला ना कि न्यू एप्लीकेशन ऑफ द सेम मेडिसिन है, तो उस ट्रीटमेंट के लिए अगर क्योर कर रहा है, हाँ, सो वही है. इस पे देयर वाज अगेन अ डिबेट. यही, अब ये सब बहुत टेक्निकल हो जाता है आप लोगों के लेवल पे, इतना ही अगर आप समझ लें तो दैट इज मोर देन इनफ. If a new application of the same medicine comes, then for that purpose it can still be patented वाली एक बात है. ठीक है, for the same composition. अभी एक और इसमें होता है जो मैंने अभी नहीं बताया, तो नेक्स्ट चीज मैं आपको बता रहा हूं, प्रोडक्ट एंड प्रोसेस पेटेंट, क्योंकि अब इसमें एक और लेयर ऑफ कॉम्प्लेक्सिटी है. ठीक है, ऐसी थोड़ी लॉयर बन जाते, वो जो आईपीआर लॉयर सुना ना आपने नाम, इंटेलेक्चुअल प्रॉपर्टी राइट लॉयर, इनको बहुत सारे पैसे, जहां जोर लग रहा है ना दिमाग पे, वहीं से सवाल भी आता है. आप तो देश सेवा के लिए कर रहे हैं, लेकिन वहीं से देश की सेवा भी होगी, बिकॉज दीज लॉज डिटरमाइन द लाइव्स ऑफ मिलियंस ऑफ पीपल. ओके, सो दैट इज देयर. एंड ओके, नाउ लेट्स कम टू, तो मैंने आपको ये समझाया क्या अभी, इससे क्वेश्चन कहां आता है, सीधे सीधे पूछा जाता है व्हाट इज कंपल्सरी लाइसेंस, व्हेन कैन दे बी इशूड, ये प्रीलिम्स में आते हैं सीधे सीधे क्वेश्चन. व्हाट इज एवरग्रीनिंग ऑफ पेटेंट, तो ये सब चीजें सीधी सीधी बेसिक्स प्रीलिम्स में पूछा जाता है. एथिकल डिलेमास अराउंड पेटेंट लॉज, आई टोल्ड यू, बिकॉज दिस इज काइंड ऑफ इंपॉर्टेंट फ्रॉम योर एग्जाम पॉइंट ऑफ व्यू, जो एथिक्स के पेपर में आएगा. कहां, कैन इंडिविजुअल राइट्स बी अलाउड टू प्रिवेल ओवर द लार्जर पब्लिक गुड. इंडिविजुअल हु, पेटेंट होल्डर. मैं बोल रहा हूं मैंने बनाई मेडिसिन, तुमको क्या, पूरी दुनिया को नहीं दूंगा मैं. अरे मैं चाहता हूं सब मरे. I am the inventor. This is called a philosophical thought experiment. It's not a joke. Suppose the world is suffering from pandemic. I have made the medicine. I will say I want the world to burn. Let people die. They all deserve to die. I am the inventor. It is my right, my property. I decide I want to give or not give. You will pay me money. I don't want your money. It is my right. No, this is a substantive argument that should individual, if individual will or comes in conflict with a larger public welfare, should it be allowed to prevail? Or there is the other thing where I am saying I will sell, इतने में बेचूंगा, तो अपनी कंट्री के जितने नवरत्न महारत्न है सब मुझे दे दो और ले लो वैक्सीन, my price, my property. So it is in this context, that is why it's an important ethical question. देखिए मैंने जो भी पढ़ाया है आप वो सबका एप्लीकेशन है, आप कितना समझ पा रहे हैं वो धीमे ही धीमे होगा. ओके, इट्स ओके दैट इफ सम ऑफ यू आर कमिंग फॉर द फर्स्ट करंट अफेयर्स क्लास एंड यू आर लाइक ये सब क्या हो रहा है सर, है ना, ये धीमे ही धीमे होगा. देयर इज अ प्रोसेस टू इट. नाउ I've given you a basic idea of the patent exemptions and the laws around it. One thing I've not told you here is about process patents and product patents. If some of you have the idea, well and good. If you don't, then I'm explaining the same to you. ये भी prelims में पूछा जाता है. And for this you can understand the evolution of Indian patent laws. ये आपको लक्ष्मीकांत में नहीं मिलेगा. मैं बार बार बोलता हूं ना कि लक्ष्मीकांत नहीं है तैयारी. Evolution of Indian patent laws, if you understand this at a certain basic level, what is it? देखिए 1947 to 1970 we had a patent law which was based on the idea of product patent. तो पहली बात, what is a product patent? There is a medicine, say, whose formula is CXHYOZ NHN whatever XYZ जो भी है. Suppose this is the formula of a medicine. You can make the same end product, say by one mechanism, that you add this much water, this much carbon dioxide, etc., heat it at 500 degree for 30 minutes and you make this medicine. The other process is you add the same components but probably say do this at 1000 degrees for 10 minutes. There can be method A and there can be method B to arrive at the same end product. Now, do you patent what? The product, or do you patent the process? That's the point. इसका क्या significance है? बहुत बड़ा significance है. Do you patent the product or do you patent the process? If you patent the product, then you are saying कोई भी mechanism से process से बनाओ, doesn't matter. If you are making this formula, the one who is the patent holder owns the formula, doesn't own the process. He or she owns the formula. They don't own the process. So if you own the product formula, then nobody else can make that product, even using a different process. So if say Pfizer makes this, meaning say Pfizer makes this medicine using formula A, using process A, method A, then no other company can make this medicine. If you say no other company can make this medicine because Pfizer owns the final formula, then you are saying it's a product patent. But if you say Pfizer only owns the process, if you say Pfizer owns process A or method A of making the formula, then what is this? Then you are saying Pfizer owns method A of making the formula, meaning Cipla can make by any other method if it can do so. And if Cipla manages to come with its own method of making the same formula, then it can do so. You thus are saying that this is process patent. This is process patent. You are not patenting the end formula, you are patenting the process. Here you are patenting the final product. Now, what did Cipla do? Cipla picked up the Pfizer formula and using that formula went back to the chemical lab and found a new method of making the same medicine. They reverse engineered the medicine. जैसे आप बोलते ना, अब फोन आया, खोला, you take, there is a phone, you buy, open up the phone, understand the wiring process, हम भी बनाते हैं, ले आओ, reverse engineering. I don't know about Coca-Cola, Campa-Cola. I don't know that example, or if that is the case, I don't know. But this is the exact thing, that basically you use the formula, उसको crystallography किया, उसका composition देखा, microscope, x-ray लगा के सब कुछ, and then you are trying to recreate the same formula with a new process. Cipla managed to do so. And in the 1980s, Indian pharma companies were experts at reverse engineering medicines. Okay. And thus, basically, why? Because in 1980s, India would have which laws? Patent laws. Product patent or process? Process. In 1980s, India had a process patent law, not a product patent law. अब मैं समझाता हूं. अब आप ये डिफरेंशिएशन समझ गए, क्योंकि इसके बेसिस पे then you can understand everything. That 1947 to 1970, India had the idea of a product patent, or the patent laws were based on a product patent regime, as it is called. Meaning, no other country can make that, no other company can make that formula, even by a different process. It is at this time that the cost of basic antibiotics in India was extremely high. No such antibiotics like a penicillin was even made in India. Was, or is, even if it was made by American companies making it in India, or it was imported from America, because no Indian company was allowed to make that antibiotic, because the product was owned by many of these pharma companies of the West. So it is at this time that the cost of antimicrobials, etc., was extremely what? High. And most people could not even think of buying these medicines, or they were outside the reach of most of the population. by 70, who came to power? Indira Gandhi. I'm no big fan of Indira Gandhi, but for one thing that she did is she changed the patent laws. And he said, yes, Sala American Nixon, Richard B. Nixon, and then Kissinger and Nixon. Nixon and Kissinger went together. And Indira Gandhi did not have any good relations with either Nixon or Kissinger. Partly this also was because of the 71 war. The 71 war, Henry Kissinger, the advisor of the US President Richard B. Nixon said, we'll send the US aircraft carrier into India if India does not withdraw from East Pakistan. So they sent the aircraft carrier into the Bay of Bengal region. By then the Indian army managed to achieve what it wanted to achieve in Bangladesh. But this did not go down well with either India. And it is at this time also that Indira Gandhi went ahead and said, बहुत हुआ, पेटेंट लॉज ये, अभी मैं वैसी इलेक्शन जीती हूँ, गरीबी हटाओ पे तो कुछ करते. तो बहुत सारा जुमला किया उन्होंने, उसमें से एक आध कुछ काम की चीज किया था, वो ये एक जिसको लोग नहीं जानते. And that is Indira Gandhi changed the patent laws and moved from product patent to process patent. Okay? बाकी उन्होंने बहुत जुमला किया, वो रूलर्स का टाइटल हटा दिया उन्होंने, उनका पेंशन छीन लिया, वो बोला इससे हटेगी गरीबी. तो जुमला की जो भारतीय ट्रेडिशन है ये नई नहीं है, इसमें कुछ नया नहीं है ना. नाउ 1971 India shifted its patent laws from product patent to process patents. And after this, what happened? Indian generic pharmaceutical companies started to flourish and grow. So much so that we became, between 1970 to 1995, we became the pharmacy of the world, and particularly of the global south, the developing countries, African countries, even developing countries and African countries, etc. Americans did not allow Indian companies to sell medicines in America, saying that you are not having product patent. Whom did it harm? Indian companies. Indian company का जग था बेचने की. Whom was it harming? American people. But the American government argued it is against America's interest. What is America's interest? Whose interest in America is America's interest? For the American people, if they could buy anti-HIV medicines at no cost or low cost, it would solve their health problem. But the American government said, no, that is not in America's interest. It is in America's interest that its intellectual property is protected. That is why we say national interest is a very commonly used, misused, abused term. Whose interest is national interest? Is also a substantive question to ask. So I hope that this is clear to you, and this is still when who came? WTO and TRIPS. And when WTO and TRIPS came, USA heavily argued in favor of which patent? Process or product? Product. US will argue for what? Product patent. USA said नहीं हमारा मार्केट लॉस हो रहा है, ये बात सही नहीं है. You are violating the right of the patent holder. से बड़ी बड़ी बातें करते हो. And 1995 onward, they drafted whom? The Trade Related Intellectual Property Rights Agreement, which is a product patent regime. India ने बोला नहीं. And WTO then said that every country must comply with TRIPS agreement. Who must also comply? Developing countries, including India. India said नहीं. पहली बात, we need more time to adopt the product patent regime. तो पहले give us time. How much time? 10 years. So from 95 to 2005 was the grace period for India and developing countries. For this 10-year period, it is a period of transition. India continued to have a process patent regime, but it is only in 2005 that India went ahead and adopted the TRIPS agreement and drafted an amendment to the Indian Patent Act of 1970. His Patent Act was amended with what? The new patent which was amended by the Act of 2005. And India said, ठीक है भाई, TRIPS and all product patent है, तो क्या हुआ? We will have safeguards. Compulsory licensing was one part of the safeguard under the Patent Act, CL as it is called. So they said these compulsory licenses are extremely important for what? Public health. Okay. And also existing safeguards under the 1970 Act will continue. 1970 Act will continue. इसमें भी लिखा था कि if there is a public health emergency, any unexpected calamity, etc., patent can be immediately revoked. Okay. So this is what we have now. So now we have which regime? Process or product? Product. Are we TRIPS compliant? Yes. And it is India's negotiating position in the WTO which has benefited not just India but also the global south. Now coming to the current ministerial. The current ministerial debated what? This. What did it debate? It debated, देखिए एक तो बहुत ही फनी है, ये 2 साल से डिबेट चल रहा है इनका, कोविड होके खत्म हो गया. So 2020 pandemic, you see there were what? A novel disease. So for diagnosing the disease, new tests had to be devised, new medicines for treating the disease, and even vaccines to immunize the people so that they don't suffer from the disease or don't suffer from severe illness. So pandemic, the COVID pandemic brought with it the need to work on all directions, finding new tests to diagnose the disease, medicines to treat patients, and vaccines to prevent diseases. And so, as on one side companies went into fast track mode to do what? Develop all these things for dealing with COVID. On the other side, began in the WTO hectic discussions on what happens when a cure is found. On the one side you're fighting virus, on the other side you're fighting greed. Who wins? Both. The victory of one is a contingent on the victory of other. तो इधर फाइजर एंड ऑल दे लाइक नहीं नहीं नहीं, जो हम बनाएंगे हमारा पेटेंट है, तो उस हिसाब से तो 20 साल आप ही का रहेगा. So the matter went to the WTO, it was being debated, discussed, and therein came this extensive debate. The developing countries, should they be offered a patent exemption as and when a treatment, test, ये सारी चीजों पे is found, है ना. बहुत सिंपल था. People don't realize this, that the relevance of this is that the same RT-PCR test, the same kits, etc., at least for test purposes, could have been done much faster. But the intellectual property owners were unwilling to share for a long time. It is after immense pressure from governments, which paid also huge money, that these formulas were given, etc., or shared with other companies. Okay. So, long story cut short, as this debate happened, the question was, should a patent exemption be given in case of the pandemic for all these things? After 2 years, the WTO has come up in this ministerial with the conclusion that a patent exemption can be given for vaccines.